Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jessica would wake up before the first sound from the chicken coop. Her body already knew the routine. Her muscles moved by memory, without her having to think. She grabbed the coat hanging on the chair, tied her hair into a messy bun, and walked to the barn with boots soaked in dew. It had been like this since she was old enough to carry a bucket without spilling half of it on the dirt floor. Growing up on a dairy farm required more than strength, it required commitment. And Jess, even though still very young, seemed to understand that better than many adults around her. Her father, Charles Morrison, was proud of his daughter, even if he didn't show it in words. His look, when she mastered milking with precision or when she helped a newborn calf feed, said more than any praise. Her mother, Helen, preferred to express affection through simple gestures, an extra slice of pie in the afternoon, a warmed blanket left on the bed during winter. The Morrison farm wasn't luxurious, but it had silent love. A kind of love that was planted every day with effort and grew invisibly, between one milking and another, between the size of cattle and days that always seemed the same. It was during one of those sweltering summers in Illinois that Jess met Mike. The county fair happened every year, but that one was different. That afternoon, she was carrying 2 jars of homemade jam to the church booth when a clumsy guy bumped into her with a bag of popped popcorn. The corn flew everywhere, her blouse got stained with butter, and he stood frozen, laughing as if accepting the disaster with good humor. Mike apologized repeatedly, offering his coat to try to hide the mess. And even in the middle of that improvised chaos, Jess noticed his easy smile, the simple way he dealt with the unexpected, as if everything could be solved with kindness and a little sugar. They spent the rest of the day together. Between ring toss games and cotton candy stands, they talked like old friends. He told her he wanted to be an engineer, to build something that would last longer than the empty promises he saw around him. She revealed that she'd always dreamed of seeing the world but didn't know how someone who smelled of barns and had calloused hands could ever leave. It was in this contrast that they found common ground, the desire to escape others' expectations. At night, they sat near the lake behind the park. The Ferris wheel lights blinked in the background, and Mike held her hand with almost reverent care, as if asking permission to enter her story. The connection was quick, but it wasn't shallow. Within a few months, they were secretly dating, exchanging letters hidden at the bottom of the barn, arranging quick meetings at the town market or during Sunday masses. By the time they finished high school, they made a bold decision. They secretly married in a simple ceremony conducted by a family friend of Mike's, in a nearly forgotten chapel, 30 minutes from town. There were no guests, no cake, no flowers. But there were promises. And for the two of them, that was enough. The next phase required courage. Mike got a partial scholarship at a university in Springfield. It was his chance to fulfill his dream, but it meant living in a cramped room, supported by odd jobs and sporadic help from his uncles. Jess didn't want to be a burden to him. She watched his dark circles grow with each visit, their phone conversations becoming shorter and more tired. That's when she saw an ad for flight attendant selection at a national airline. She remembered her old dream, the desire to see big cities, airports, foreign languages. And she saw an exit. A way to help Mike. To be useful. To live both their dreams. She would travel, send money, and he would study until he reached stability. She told Mike the plan during a quick visit on a Sunday afternoon. She expected resistance, maybe an argument. But he just looked at her with teary eyes and cupped her face in his hands. "Promise you'll come back to me?" Jess didn't hesitate. "Always." Those words accompanied her in the following weeks, during intense training, emergency drills, first aid classes. She stood out. She had posture, empathy, a natural kindness that charmed even the most demanding instructors. She earned the blue uniform with her name embroidered on the chest and started living among flight connections, layovers in cities she once only knew by name, and long periods alone in hotel rooms. At first, everything seemed magical. Jess sent postcards to Mike from each new place she visited. She saved hotel soaps in a box to show later. She called whenever she could, even if only for a few minutes. But with time, the distance gained weight. The silence stretched between calls. The letters became sparse. The words began to sound automatic, like protocol phrases. Even so, she persisted. Because she believed in what they had built. Because she still slept with her wedding ring hidden on the chain she wore under her uniform. Because, deep in her chest, she still felt the certainty that one day she would return home, and he would be there, waiting, as promised. But what Jess didn't yet know was that not all flights take you back. And sometimes, the sky hides turbulence that the heart's radar can't predict. It was early morning when Jess rested her head against the airplane window, watching the darkness of the sky cut only by the regular blinking of the plane's lights. The silence inside was different from the silence of the farm. It didn't bring peace. It was a silence filled with hammering thoughts, questions she avoided answering. It had been 3 weeks since she last spoke with Mike. She had sent messages, yes. 2 missed calls. But he no longer answered on the first attempt. And when he did answer, his voice came dry, busy, as if responding out of obligation. She blamed herself for his exhaustion, the stress of exams, the distance between them. She thought about requesting a transfer, maybe taking fewer international flights. But at the same time, moving away from this new world felt like closing a door that had cost so much to open. That night, they were on a flight to Paris. Full crew, calm passengers. The kind of journey that was tiring but predictable. Jess moved confidently through the aisles, serving drinks, smiling by habit, hiding the weight accumulating in her chest. Between rows, she crossed paths with Brad Stevens. He was the supervisor for the team on that flight. An older man, with impeccable posture and a way of speaking that caught attention even in the middle of the cabin. He had observed Jess on other layovers, but it was that night that something different began. "You have a gentle way of dealing with people. It's not common to find that these days," he said, leaning discreetly on the galley counter of the plane. Jess thanked him with a polite smile. Brad kept talking. They exchanged comments about routes, curious passengers, countries worth visiting. At some point, he mentioned a friend's restaurant in Paris and invited her to dinner during the layover. She hesitated. She knew it was inappropriate. She knew, above all, what accepting that invitation meant. But loneliness spoke louder. The lack of responses from Mike. The unanswered messages. The calls hung up mid-conversation. Everything seemed to lead to one certainty she didn't want to admit: perhaps she was no longer part of his life. They went to the restaurant. Brad was charming. The kind of man who knows how to listen, who compliments without exaggeration, who touches the other person's hand gently, as if wanting to explore every inch of skin delicately. Jess felt beautiful there. She felt seen. She ordered wine. Smiled more than she imagined she could smile. Laughed at jokes that, in another context, she would have called silly. And when Brad touched her face while saying she deserved someone who valued her, she didn't pull away. After dinner, they walked to the hotel. And when the elevator stopped at her floor, Brad's eyes asked what his lips still hesitated to say. It was at that moment she had a chance to stop. To thank him for the evening and go in alone. But instead, she stayed. And that gesture, small on the outside, was enormous on the inside. A point of no return. That night, Jess crossed a line she had sworn to respect. The next morning, regret came disguised as silence. She avoided Brad's gaze during the return flight. She tried to act like it was just another layover, as if that episode could be buried in her memory as an accident, something isolated. But conscience doesn't stay quiet. Jess spent the 7-hour return trip with her throat tight and her eyes avoiding her reflection in the windows. Her heart beat irregularly, as if it knew something was about to collapse. When she arrived home, she dropped her suitcase in the hallway. She wanted to shower, sleep, forget. But before going upstairs, she noticed the mailbox was full. She picked up the envelopes and, among bills and advertisements, there was a letter. She recognized Mike's handwriting the instant her eyes landed on the paper. The envelope was torn, as if opened angrily. Inside, 3 handwritten pages. The first page began with a single paragraph: "I didn't have to look far. Your tablet was connected to our Wi-Fi. The photos synced automatically." Jess felt the ground slip from beneath her feet. She ran to the bedroom, turned on the tablet, and there they were, pictures from Paris. The restaurant. Brad's face. The two of them laughing. The elevator. Everything was there. Automatic captures of a night she would give anything to erase. Mike had seen it all. The second page of the letter didn't contain insults. Or threats. Just pain. He talked about the effort to keep the relationship alive. The nights he studied until falling asleep thinking about her face. The promises made under the trees of the farm, promises now broken. The last sentence of the letter was direct: "You are no longer my home." That's when Jess understood that she had lost Mike. Not because of Brad. But because she had let the silence grow into an abyss between them. She tried calling. Sent messages. Wrote a 5-page email. Nothing. Silence. Days later, she decided to return to the farm, seeking support from her parents. But life had one more blow in store. As she stepped off the bus that dropped her at the entrance of the property, she saw an ambulance leaving at high speed. She ran to the porch. Her father was sitting there, speechless. He just pointed inside the house. Helen was on the couch, half of her body immobile. A stroke. The left side compromised. Her face expressionless. And in her mother's eyes, a glimmer of recognition, but also the knowledge that something had been lost forever. Jess knelt before her, holding her hand tightly. She wanted to say so much. But all she managed to whisper was, "Forgive me for going so far." And there, beside the woman who had always been her safe harbor, Jess understood that she was back. But it was a hard return. A return without hugs. A return with scars that hadn't even begun to form. The flight attendant uniform remained folded neatly at the bottom of the closet, but with no intention of being worn again. Jess packed the heels she used to wear on flights, the toiletry kit with hotel hygiene products, the expensive makeup she bought during international layovers. Each item placed in the box seemed to bury a part of what she had been. Her hair, once styled to meet airline standards, was now tied in a makeshift bun, more out of necessity than vanity. The alarm clock still rang before sunrise, but for very different reasons. She had taken over everything. The farm. The house. Her mother's medical routine. Charles, her father, no longer had the same strength as before. Age weighed on him. The arms that once carried sacks of feed and fixed engines now trembled lifting a glass of water. So, without ceremony, Jess became everything she needed to be: daughter, nurse, administrator, laborer. The day began with preparing her mother's medications. She was meticulous with dosages, learned to monitor blood pressure, administer injections, massage stiff muscles. Then, she put on rubber gloves, adjusted the brim of her cap, and headed to the barn. The smell of manure never bothered her. It was familiar. The same smell from when her mother taught her to care for chickens as a child, holding her hand to avoid breaking eggs. Now, all this repeated in a different role. Grain for pigs, the cow trough, fence checks, milk records. Jess documented everything in old notebooks, with firm handwriting and quick calculations. She learned to negotiate with suppliers, identify signs of fever in calves, deal with delivery trucks. On Sundays, she cleaned the church with some neighbors. And when she had free time, she walked through the pastures, talking to herself. Sometimes, she told stories to her mother, even though she didn't respond. She read newspapers aloud, commented on headlines, laughed alone at jokes. She found a way to keep her presence alive, even though her mother's body no longer followed. Gradually, the town began respecting Jess differently. She was no longer just the girl who left to fly around the world. She was the woman who returned, who sustained what many men abandoned. The pastor praised her dedication during sermons. The pharmacy owner stopped charging for some medications, saying it was a thank you. Even the oldest neighbors, accustomed to judgment and gossip, began praising her strength. But that didn't make the days easy. There were nights when Jess collapsed on the couch in dirty clothes and fell asleep without eating. Others when she cried silently, hidden behind the barn, because the pain felt too immense. Once, she passed out while changing a tractor tire. She was taken to the hospital in the neighboring town, received fluids, and the next day she was back, fixing the barn as if nothing had happened. Because here, giving up was never an option. One rainy afternoon, a small dog appeared at the farm entrance. Matted fur, one ear down, and a clever way of approaching. Jess took him in without hesitation. She gave him leftover chicken, made a makeshift shelter with straw and wooden boxes. The dog immediately bonded with her, following her everywhere. On tough days, he was the only one who licked her hands when everything else felt distant. She named the puppy Blue, in honor of the scarf her mother used to wear in her hair before the stroke. Blue became constant company, as if he knew that, even in silence, Jess needed someone by her side. Between hospital visits, farm maintenance, and growing loneliness, something inside her began to change. This woman who once traveled the world smiling at strangers in tight cabins now found beauty in rough routines. In cleaning the barn. In the smell of coffee she prepared for her father at 5 a.m. In the sound of the old radio while hanging clothes on the line. Every ordinary detail now seemed to contain a dose of redemption. As if, by caring for others, she was caring for herself. As if, by carrying everything alone, she found a way to repay the debt she felt she had left behind. Her relationship with her father deepened during this process. Charles had always been reserved, but over the months, he began sharing stories from his youth, memories of her mother, lessons he'd kept to himself. One afternoon, while fixing the chicken coop fence together, he said, with teary eyes, "You've become what she always wanted to be." Jess paused, gripped the hammer firmly, and remained silent. It was hard to hear that. Because, inside, she still saw herself as someone who failed. Who betrayed. Who abandoned. But in that moment, something different ignited. Maybe she wasn't just rebuilding the farm. She was rebuilding her own name. Over time, she began receiving letters from former co-workers. Some praised her courage for leaving everything. Others asked if she'd return to flying. But she never replied. She stored the letters in a shoebox and left them there. Because at that moment, all that mattered was doing what she was doing, taking care of the land, her mother, her father, the animals. And in the midst of it, taking care of herself, even if she didn't realize it. It was during a common sunset that she realized she hadn't thought about Mike for months. She looked at the fields, at the horizon, and didn't feel longing. She felt peace. A strange, silent, but real peace. As if she had found a new meaning for everything she had lived. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to open the next chapter, even if she didn't know what it would be. Jess was on her knees, gloved hands massaging the swollen belly of a newborn calf that hadn't eaten since morning. The animal was breathing with difficulty, its dull eyes showing something was wrong, but she persisted. She had already fed it with a bottle, prepared a mix of warm milk and vitamins, and applied warm compresses with heated cloths. Blue, the dog who never left her side, watched silently, as if also waiting for a sign of improvement. The strong smell of wet hay and antibiotics mixed with the sweat of her effort, and still, she didn't stop. She knew the life of that calf depended on persistence. And if there was one thing Jess carried in her chest after everything she had lived through, it was persistence. She heard light footsteps behind her but didn't turn immediately. She assumed it was her father or someone from the neighborhood coming to offer help. When she heard a child's voice calling for Jessica, her breath caught for a moment. It was a boy's voice. Soft, curious. She turned slowly and saw him there, standing at the barn entrance, with a blue backpack and a toy car in his hands. The boy had wavy brown hair and honey-colored eyes, very similar to Mike's. Jess's heart skipped a beat, but she stayed composed. "Are you Jess?" he asked, with a shy smile. She nodded, wiping her hands on her dirty apron, trying to figure out what this boy was doing there alone. Before she could ask anything, another voice emerged from the background. Deeper. Familiar. The sound of heavier steps. And then, from the shadow of the barn, appeared Mike. The impact was immediate. Time seemed to lose its rhythm. Years of silence condensed into that moment. Mike was different. More mature. His facial features more pronounced. Stubble on his face. He wore worn jeans and a simple t-shirt. He held a water bottle, and his eyes betrayed discomfort. He didn't say anything right away. He just approached the boy, placed his hand on his shoulder, and addressed Jess with a contained expression. "Sorry to show up like this. We were passing through. He wanted to see real cows, and I knew you were still here." Jess felt the world spin. She maintained her composure. Took a deep breath. She looked at Mike, at the boy, and at the similarities that were impossible to ignore. The way the boy approached the calf, curious but unafraid. The gentleness with which he touched the animals. It was in his blood. "What's his name?" she asked, as if already knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. "Jacob," Mike replied. "He's 7. 7. Exactly the number of years since she last saw Mike. Jess swallowed hard. Every second of that revelation squeezed her chest tighter. Mike had moved on. He had built a family. Jacob wasn't just a boy. He was the symbol of everything she had lost. The life she dreamed of. The home she wanted to build. And that now belonged to another woman, another story. She tried to smile at Jacob, but the pain was too heavy to hide. She knelt beside him, pointed to the calf, and calmly explained what was happening. The boy listened intently, his wide eyes full of interest. When he asked if the calf would survive, Jess looked at the animal, then at the boy, and said she was doing everything possible. But sometimes, even when you do everything right, things get out of your control. Jacob nodded, as if understanding more than any adult could. Mike remained silent. He observed everything but didn't interfere. When the calf finally managed to stand, still trembling, Jess smiled. Not out of happiness, but out of relief. It was as if that small miracle came to balance the pain of Mike and Jacob's presence there. A breath amidst suffocation. Before leaving, Mike approached one more time. He handed her a small envelope with his phone number, saying that if she ever needed to talk, he was there. Jess accepted the paper but didn't reply. What she wanted to say was impossible to put into words. She wanted to say she still loved him. That every day she spent caring for her mother, working alone on that farm, his name lingered in the silences. But she also wanted to say that, in that moment, she understood there was no going back. Because seeing Jacob there, so much like him, was the final period that had been missing. The last piece of a painful puzzle. Mike and Jacob got into the car. Jess stayed there, motionless, watching as the vehicle disappeared down the road. When she returned to the barn, Blue was lying near the calf, which was already breathing more strongly. Jess stroked the animal's snout, closed her eyes, and let the tears finally fall. Not out of regret. Not out of nostalgia. But out of acceptance. And there, In the mud, the smell of hay, and the scars time had left behind, she understood that her life would never be what she dreamed. But still, it was life. It was real. And, in some strange way, it was hers alone. Jess still carried in her chest the weight of that afternoon in the barn. The encounter with Mike and Jacob left invisible scars, too deep to be ignored, but too visible to be hidden. However, life on the farm didn't stop for her to process her feelings. There was milk to collect, fences to fix, trucks to receive. Even with her heart in pieces, she pressed on, as she had since her mother fell ill. Work was her way of silencing what hurt too much to say. A few weeks later, a call from the family lawyer interrupted her routine. It was the summons for the official reading of Helen Morrison's will. Jess knew this moment would come, but hearing the confirmation still made her stomach churn. She wiped her grease-stained hands on her jeans and marked the date. She wanted to resolve everything quickly, receive whatever was rightfully hers, handle the paperwork, and return to the farm, far from memories that now seemed to crash over her in stronger waves than ever. The meeting took place in the modest office of an old family friend. The walls were lined with shelves crammed with worn books, the smell of old paper dominating the space. The lawyer, a soft-spoken man with thinning hair named Mr. Bradley, greeted her with a sad smile, as if he already knew the news he had to deliver would change a lot. Without preamble, he handed her a sealed envelope. "Your mother requested this document be read only in your presence. And only after," he hesitated, carefully choosing his words, "after she passed." Jess held the envelope with both hands. The paper trembled between her fingers. The red seal seemed to scream. She took a deep breath and, in front of Mr. Bradley, carefully tore the edge. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, round, full of flourishes Helen always added at the end of each letter. The letter began with a confession. Helen recounted that, almost 30 years ago, on a rainy September night, a desperate young woman knocked on the farm door. She carried a baby wrapped in simple blankets. The woman cried so much she could barely speak. She said only that she couldn't raise the child, that she needed to run, and begged someone to take care of her. Charles and Helen, married for several years and childless, accepted without hesitation. They loved that girl as if she were their own blood. And they decided Jess would never need to know, so she would feel like she truly belonged to every inch of that land. The revelation hit Jess like a punch. Her identity, until then so clear, now unraveled into doubts. She wondered who that woman was who had left her. Why had she abandoned her? Had she ever thought about looking for her? Her heart raced, her breathing shortened, and there was still more to read. Helen left another detail. Something that seemed minor but carried a bombshell. The woman's name was Karen Stevens. The same last name as Brad. The same man who had destroyed her love life with betrayal in Paris. The scattered pieces of the puzzle, spread across years, now fit together brutally. The woman who abandoned her likely had a direct connection to the man who shattered her romantic life. It was as if fate had cruelly stitched ironies into every corner of her story. Jess let the letter fall onto her lap. Her hands covered her face, and hot tears streamed uncontrollably. It wasn't just the loss of Mike. Nor the regret of betraying the purest love she had ever known. It was the feeling that her entire life had been built on secrets. That her very blood, her origin, carried the shadow of someone who might not even care who she had become. The lawyer waited in silence, respecting the weight of the moment. When she finally managed to lift her head, he handed her another envelope, smaller. Inside was a map of the property and a handwritten note from Helen. "This farm is yours, my daughter. Every stone, every tree. Not because you were born here. But because life chose you to care for it. As we chose you." Jess pressed the paper to her chest. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't answer the questions. But it gave her something no one could take away: belonging. The farm, the cows, the fields, all of it was hers because she had become part of that land. Not through blood, but through the invisible roots formed through love. That same night, back home, sitting on the porch step with Blue lying beside her, Jess thought about everything she had lived through. All the losses, all the wrong choices, all the pains that shaped her. She could spend the rest of her life ruminating on injustices, questioning why things happened. But she could also do something different. She could transform all that pain into something that could touch other lives. That's when the idea came to her. She would abandon commercial milk production. She would transform the farm into a shelter for women like her, women who needed to start over. Women who carried guilt, trauma, unfinished stories. She would call it Mother's Light, in honor of Helen, who took her in without expecting anything in return, and who left the greatest gift of all, the chance to rewrite her story. The next day, she put the idea into action. She invited old acquaintances, asked for help to renovate the main barn, adapted rooms into simple dormitories, and posted flyers in nearby towns. The first women who arrived carried in their eyes the same sadness Jess knew so well. But gradually, through work on the land, conversations at sunset, timid laughter near the fire, each of them began to rebuild. And so did Jess. Years later, at a community fair, a reporter asked her how she managed to overcome so much suffering. Jess looked at the field, at the young women smiling as they tended the gardens, and replied, "Life broke me. But it also gave me the pieces to build something that will last far longer than my pain." And she smiled. A true smile. A smile that, even amidst scars, could illuminate everything around her. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.